Pick a number. No, really, pick a number. Think of a number in your head. Pick a number. Pick a number. You got a number? Pick a number. You got a number? Think of it in your head. Think of it in your head. Now, on the count of 3, we're going to yell out our numbers, okay? You don't know what this is for. You don't have any idea. That's what makes it fun for me. You're welcome. On the count of 3, you've got a number. You picked a number. What's the count of 3? 1, 2, 3. Okay, good. Now, it's interesting. Some of you went high. I didn't hear all the numbers, but some of you went high. Some of you stayed lower. Maybe you picked a favorite number. I don't know. You probably have a favorite number. Man, I remember Nick used to think that certain numbers were boys and certain numbers were girls. I'm not sure how he got there or whether he still thinks that, but some of you might. I don't know. Maybe you think that too. I don't know. But some of you probably got complicated. I don't know. I don't know if I heard any decimals or fractions. But you could have picked any number, right? Any number. I mean, it's crazy what we choose when there are no restrictions, and when we can just choose whatever we want. I mean, you could have picked anything. You picked your number. Well, tuck that away. We're going to come back to that in a little bit. Today we're starting this series that leads up to Easter based on some of the questions that Jesus asked. He was a master storyteller, a master teacher, but maybe most of all, if we really look at it, he was a master question asker. Man, that rhymes. I think that's got some legs. I don't know. We usually think of Jesus as the one who has all the answers, right? And he is the answer, right? But he was also always asking a whole lot of questions. In flipping through the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you will find Jesus asking over 300 questions. And of the 183 questions asked of him, he directly answered 3 of them. We'll get into that more as this series progresses. But it started early on. When Jesus was a boy of 12, he wandered off from his parents, right? And they found him in the temple. It says Luke 2:46, Mary and Joseph, quote, found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking them questions. From very early on, Jesus was all about asking questions. He asked questions to learn. He asked questions to challenge people. And maybe most of all, Jesus asked questions to awaken people to spiritual truth. So in these weeks leading up from now till Easter, we're going to be looking at some of the questions Jesus asked. Not all 300, I promise. We don't have that many weeks. We don't have that much time. But we're going to have a few of the questions that I believe have the potential to awaken us to spiritual truth for our lives. Today, we're going to look at a scene that happened to Jesus as he was heading toward Jerusalem, right at the end of his ministry. He's heading toward Jerusalem. He encounters a man in the crowd outside of the city of Jericho. No, it's not Zacchaeus, but it's another guy with a fun name. We're going to look at Mark chapter 10, verse 46 and following. It says, "Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me!' Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet. But he shouted all the more, 'Son of David, have mercy on me!' Jesus stopped and said, 'Call him.' So they called the blind man. 'Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you.' Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. 'What do you want me to do for you?' Jesus asked him. 'What do you want me to do for you?' The blind man said, 'Rabbi, I want to see.' 'Go,' said Jesus, 'your faith has healed you.' Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Life had not been kind to old Bartimaeus. He was blind. In the culture of that day, that was considered by many as a curse from God. He was poor with not much hope of getting wealthy at all. With those two strikes against him, this blind man didn't really even have his own identity. He was called Bartimaeus. Bar means son of. People didn't even refer to this guy by his name. They referred to him as the son of another. Oh, there goes Timaeus' boy. You know, the blind guy. He didn't even really have his own identity. So Bartimaeus had resorted to begging. It was really his only option. He was, in many ways, in the dark. No hope of a better life. He couldn't see his hand in front of his face, let alone a light at the end of the tunnel. But then Jesus came by. They say that people who have lost one sense, then they compensate with heightened awareness in other senses, right? And so I'm sure that Bartimaeus' hearing was more keen than the average person because he had been blind, and he could probably hear this unusual commotion as a crowd was heading out of Jericho toward Jerusalem for the Passover. He was probably thinking, oh, there's a crowd, I might get some more donations. It's a religious crowd. Maybe they'll feel like they need to give. Maybe this will be a good day. But then as people started speaking and talking around him, Bartimaeus realized that Jesus was coming his way. And Bartimaeus had heard of Jesus. It appears that he knew who Jesus was. Probably a lot of sick and lame people over those years had heard of Jesus by that point. This was the Jesus who had been traveling the countryside, teaching wonderful things and healing people. This was the Jesus that many believed to be the Messiah, the one who had been prophesied about. This was the Jesus that some even ventured to say was the Son of God himself. And now that Jesus just happened to be passing right in front of old Timaeus' boy, that blind guy. So Bartimaeus began to yell out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. But the people around him tried to shut him up, right? It says they rebuked him. There's sense here that they're reprimanding, they're putting him down. Come on, shut up, be quiet. You're making a ruckus for no reason. This is Jesus. We need to pay attention. Jesus doesn't want to bother with you. He's an important teacher. He might even be God himself. You're nothing. Just be quiet. But what that crowd didn't realize was that because Jesus was indeed sent from God, people like Bartimaeus were exactly who he wanted to be bothered with, right? Bartimaeus had nothing going for him except desperation and blind faith. Couple great things here to notice about Jesus. Whenever you're reading the Bible, you read a passage, I think one question we need to ask a lot, whether it's in your devotional stuff that goes along with your passage that day or not, whatever it is, one question we need to ask is, what does this say about God? What does this passage reveal about who God is? What is God like based on what I'm reading here in this story or this passage? And I think we see a couple of things here about who God is, who Jesus is, when we read this. Two things that I see right away. Jesus heard Bartimaeus, and he stopped. The Message translation says that Jesus stopped in his tracks. I don't know, dusty roads and sandals, it probably didn't get but almost, you kind of get that feel, right? That Jesus, no, I heard in all the hubbub and all the crowd and all the everything, and he heard Bartimaeus and he stopped. Before we go anywhere else with this message today, I need you to know that Jesus has time for you. He listens. He hears. He wants you to cry out to him in faith. Don't be afraid to, quote, bother God with the needs of your life. He is listening. He will hear and he will respond. Jesus has time for you. Well, once the crowd realized that Jesus actually wanted to talk to Bartimaeus, they changed their tune completely, and they encouraged him to go to Jesus. Oh, Bartimaeus, you want Bartimaeus? Yeah, I know Bartimaeus. Yeah, he's right here. And all of a sudden now they're his best friend, right? Crowds are so fickle. If you're always listening to the crowd, you're going to be confused. You're one way and then another and then another. But this then brings me to my second favorite part of this whole story. My favorite part is the question that Jesus asked. We'll get to that in just a second. But my second favorite part, before Bartimaeus ever stood in front of Jesus, he did something that I think is extremely significant. And if we're not careful, we'll just kind of gloss over it and read through the story and move on. But in verse 50, it starts with 4 words that I think speak volumes. Well, they speak volumes to me anyway. Mark 10, verse 50 says this: throwing his cloak aside. Bartimaeus was a beggar. Probably, picture in your mind someone homeless that you've maybe seen on a street corner somewhere in a big city. Bartimaeus would not have had many possessions, and those that he did have, he had with him. Doesn't say that he had a shopping cart, but he had a cloak. That cloak was probably his most prized and valued possession. It was the outer garment that kind of kept him halfway presentable in life. It was the coat that kept him warm. It very well could have been what he used as a bedroll at night. It may have had pockets where he kept anything else of value, maybe even the coins that he'd already collected that day. And yet when Bartimaeus heard Jesus calling for him, he threw his cloak aside. Bartimaeus was blind in a crowd, in a crowded city setting. He's not getting that coat back. If nothing happens with Jesus, he's not getting that coat back. And yet he throws his coat aside, probably his most prized possession. What do we do with that? It reminded me, both of our kids, and your kids probably did too, both of our kids had favorite stuffed animals when they were little. Did you guys? You guys had, maybe you still sleep with your favorite. I don't know. You don't have to testify to that today. That's fine. You can not be that transparent. That's okay. Claire, our daughter Claire, had a small pink Beanie Baby bunny. Her name was Bunny. And it's very insightful. But anyway, and she slept with that bunny every night, and had it with her a lot of the day, right? And you know how this goes. For Nick, it was a yellow Winnie the Pooh that he not only slept with, but he tended to chew on, especially the nose. He chewed and sucked on Winnie the Pooh's nose so much that stuffing was coming out and it was tearing up. And due to his injuries, I don't believe that Winnie the Pooh has survived over the years. He is no longer with us. But I'm pretty sure that Claire, at age 27, still has her bunny. I'm getting confirmation here, yes. I can remember many nights when the bunny was missing, and it caused turmoil, and it delayed bedtime. Because even though there's a whole closet full of stuffed animals, none of them were the bunny. There were times, sometimes we found the bunny under the bed, back in the corner. Sometimes the bunny was mixed up in the bedclothes, right, in the blankets and stuff. I believe at least once Claire's loving younger brother hid the bunny on purpose. And I don't know. I can't testify to that or not. I didn't ask his permission before this, so I probably shouldn't have said anything there. But anyway, more than once, the bunny was left at a grandparent's house. Bad things. I remember more than one trip turning around partway home and going back just to get the bunny. Again, whole closet full, whole bedroom full of stuffed animals, many of which are Beanie Babies that are exactly the same size. In the dark, they're exactly the same, right? No, we got to have the bunny. I know that on at least one occasion, Bunny took a trip in a little cardboard box halfway across the country to come back to be shipped back to because we left it too far away and didn't remember in time. That bunny was Claire's prized possession, and that's what I think of when I hear this story about Bartimaeus throwing down his cloak. I know maybe I'm a little weird, but I think it would have been a little bit like Claire throwing her bunny in the garbage because she knew that something even better was in store. When Bartimaeus threw down his cloak, he was throwing away his comfort and his security, everything that was familiar and safe. A lot of what made up his life and kept things together. And he threw his cloak aside, and he came to Jesus with nothing, desperate for what Jesus could do in his life. And it's then that Jesus asked the question of the day, "What do you want me to do for you?" The question reveals Jesus' heart for people. It shows Jesus' servant heart for those who are in desperate need. The verse just previous to this, Mark chapter 10, verse 45, so we read starting in verse 46 and all that. Right in verse 45, right before this, Jesus had just told his disciples why he had come. And it says, verse 45 of Mark 10, "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve." And immediately we have this story of blind Bartimaeus, and Jesus' posture then was of a servant. What do you want me to do for you? In asking that, he is revealing his desire to meet Bartimaeus right where he was, right in the middle of his need, and he's ready to serve. Now, this is one of those questions where you're kind of going, Jesus, get a clue here, buddy. You got to know what Bartimaeus wants. I mean, he's a blind guy. This is Timaeus' boy, the blind dude, right? Jesus, you should be. Rest assured, Jesus did indeed know what Bartimaeus needed that day before he asked the question. He had to find out if Bartimaeus knew what he needed. I think it's interesting that this is not the first time that Jesus asked this question. I don't know if you know this. I had to be reminded of it, and it was kind of a wow moment this week as I was going through this. Jesus asked this exact same question in this exact same chapter, just a few verses up before this passage. He was addressing two of his disciples, James and John. He asked this exact same question, but it's a whole different setting. And it turned out completely differently. Mark 10, 35 and 36, James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. "Teacher," they said, "what do you want to do? We want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked. The exact same question to James and John. But the results are different because I believe James and John were not asking out of desperate, humble faith, but they were asking out of selfish, ambitious desires. See, they were asking, if we continue there, they replied, "Let one of us sit at your right hand and the other at your left in your glory." In other words, we want to be the most important people right under you when all this and everything shakes down here. We would like to be the guys. You're the guy, but we want to be the guys right under the guy, right? We want to be weird. Yeah, and Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. They didn't answer his question the way they should have. James and John weren't aware of how audacious their question was. They were interested in status and significance coming from their own pride and ambition. In essence, I think we can say that James and John didn't really know what they needed, so when Jesus asked them this question, they didn't have a good answer. Bartimaeus, on the other hand, simply answered from a humble, desperate heart. Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And Bartimaeus said, "Rabbi, I want to see. I want to see." What if Jesus asked you this question? It's kind of like when I asked you to pick a number a little bit ago, right? I mean, you could choose any number. Some of you chose pretty small. Some of you made it complicated with decimals or fractions. You could have had any number. When Jesus asked, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think a lot of times we think too small. We might start ticking off a prayer request list, right? Well, you need to do this and this and this and this. And it comes from a selfish heart that just wants Jesus to make our lives comfortable and pain-free. Just do this stuff for me because that'll make my life good, Jesus. That's what you're there for. But Jesus' question here goes so much deeper than that. He's asking each of us, do you really want to see? Do you want to see life from my perspective? Do you want to know my wisdom? Do you want to experience my grace? Do you want to see? What do you want me to do for you? I think one thing that keeps us from telling Jesus, Rabbi, I want to see, is that we don't even realize that we're blind. We don't recognize our spiritual need. I believe that's why Jesus asked Bartimaeus the question that day, to determine if he knew what he needed. And I believe that when we come to Jesus in prayer and we sense him asking, what can I do for you? He wants us to acknowledge our spiritual blindness and that we have to rely wholly and completely on him. I have a fear that if Jesus came to us today and stood in front of us individually, each one of us, and asked, what do you want me to do for you? Too many of us would either just start rattling off a list of superficial stuff that we think would make our lives better, or worse yet, I think we might say, you know, Jesus, I think I'm good. We don't recognize our spiritual need. That may be because we don't want to look weird, or to let the crowd have a chance to belittle us or silence us, kind of like on that road that day. We want to save face. We don't want to look too desperate, right? Jesus, I'm just falling on your... No, I'm going to maybe stay back. I need to look like I have it all together, even if I don't. But, I mean, we care too much what others might think, so we don't even cry out to Jesus. I remember, years ago, talking to someone and talking about, the altars and praying at the altar. I don't remember the whole context, but I do remember that this person told me, you'll never see me at that altar. There's no way I'll step out in front of people and let them think that I might have a problem. You'll never see me at that altar. We want to save face. We don't want to look like we have any needs. Or a lot of times we might kind of hold back from what we want from Jesus, what we need from Jesus, because we want to hold on to our old familiar way of life. We know that coming to Jesus will mean throwing aside our cloak, our bunny, whatever it is, our security and our comfort. We're used to things this way, and I mean, we'll be fine. I'll cope. It's okay, Jesus, I got it. We don't really need to rock the boat. I'm going to hold on to what I know, even if what I know is spiritual blindness and poverty. I guess the thing I fear the most is that we just are not really desperate for Jesus. I heard that some people who have come through Alcoholics Anonymous and then kind of link up with a church at somewhere along the way in their journey. Some people have asked the question, well, why can't the church be more like an AA meeting? Pastor John Ortberg has answered that question by saying the church will be more like an AA meeting when Christians are more like alcoholics. And by that, he just means desperate, right? Those who go through AA are usually so desperate that they don't care what people think. They don't want just surface answers. They're done with living the way they've been living life. They're desperate for an answer, for the answer. Are you as desperate for Jesus as an alcoholic is desperate to get sober? Are you as desperate as a blind man on the side of the road that just wants to see? Jesus can only heal us when we acknowledge our desperate spiritual need. When we're so sick of our sin and our selfishness and the spiritual blindness that we've just got to get rid of it. Just as Bartimaeus threw aside his cloak and everything that it represented, we have to, like it says in Hebrews 12, throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and we need to come to Jesus, run the race with Jesus. We have to get rid of the old way of living and let God transform our lives. When Jesus asks us, what do you want me to do for you? It has to be the cry of our hearts to respond, I want to see. We're all in a room like this with people from all sorts of places and situations. We're all at different stages in our spiritual lives, right? Some of you might be at the stage of spiritual life. What spiritual life? What are we talking about here? I'm just hanging out at church here, and I'm not quite sure why. While others of you, I know, have been walking down the road following Jesus for years. And if that's you, I would venture to guess that you still remember that day along the road when you called out to Jesus and he stopped. And he said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he healed your spiritual blindness. I hope that time, that moment, those moments are etched in your mind for eternity. The God of the universe stopped in his tracks and called your name. And I hope that that you sense those opportunities continuing through your life. That as you have those spiritual needs, you know that you have a God who cares enough to ask the question, "What do you want me to do for you? I'm here to serve." If you've not ever experienced a moment with Jesus like that, the good news is that through his Spirit, on a Sunday morning like this, he is passing by. He's always passing by, and he's always asking the question, "What do you want me to do for you?" And you have to recognize, you have to come to the place that you're desperate enough to confess your sin and the things that are holding you back and commit your life to him. The last verse in that whole passage with Bartimaeus and all that happened there. The Gospel of Mark is just quick. It's the shortest of the four Gospels. It's just choo, 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 choo. This is just a few verses, right? But it probably took a little longer than what it took to read it there today. It says that Jesus healed him and he could see, and then he followed Jesus down the road. He was on an adventure with Jesus from that moment on. The worship team's going to come back, and we're going to sing that new song that we learned already today, all about finding our identity in Jesus. And we have the chance to celebrate what God has done in our lives, or to ask him to do it in our lives, to as we come to him in desperate need, and to acknowledge that he is the one that has the answer. He is the one who can bring sight to us spiritually. Will you stand? I'm going to pray, and then we're going to sing together. And as we sing together, if you sense God asking you that question, and you're just desperate enough, I'd invite you not to move away or to push him away, but to respond in desperate obedience, to come and pray, to call out to him, to acknowledge your need. "Rabbi, I want to see." Lord God, we thank you that you are a God who hears, a God who stops, a God who listens, a God who responds, a God who sent his Son not to be served, but to serve. Lord, I pray that you will help us as we walk through life, that we can recognize that you are always ready to do what we need in our lives, but you're waiting for us to recognize that and to come to you. And so, Lord, I pray that maybe even today, that question ringing in our mind, in our ears today, "What do you want me to do for you?" Lord, I pray that we would be honest with you. We would respond in obedience, and that we would be desperate for what you can do, and only you can do in our lives today. In Jesus' name, amen.